Hello nerds and nerdettes, and welcome back to the channel where once again we have a new review for you guys. Today we will be covering a book that I recently reread, and that is none other than X Factor by Peter David, Volume 1. There's currently two omnibuses out and a third one to eventually be released, but this will be my review on just strictly Volume 1. But before we get into the brunt of this review, a quick reminder, like always, that if you are looking for this book or any of the other books that I feature on my channel, to use the channel sponsor organicpricebooks.com, you can use the discount code STAYNERDY for $2 off your order, or when ordering 4 or more books, you can use the code STAYNERDY, ship it together, to get 5% off that entire order. It's a great way to save yourself some money, but also to support the channel. So thank you to each and every one of you guys that have been using that code or decide to use that code, because it really helps a lot. But let's go ahead and get into the details of the book. So this particular Marvel Omnibus, X Factor by Peter David, does have a cover price of $100, not your typical $125 price tag that we do see slapped on Marvel Omnibuses, and that's really because this is before that price was the status quo, if you will, for a Marvel Omnibus. And then we do have a page count of 848 pages, so it's not exactly in that 1,000-page mark. It is still a pretty dense story, but you're not going to be getting a whole ton of content here, just kind of the first half of Peter David working on this particular title. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the book, take a look at the build, talk a little bit about the story, my reading experience, and then we can circle back here. And here we are, X Factor by Peter David. This is the first volume. We have 2 volumes released at this point and a 3rd volume solicited. This is the standard edition cover. The DM variant cover I will put over here. I want to say this is fairly in stock in a lot of distributors, so if you are looking for this particular book, shouldn't be super hard to track down. We can also take a quick look at the spine, which is a very striking and unique white spine with the volume 1 at the bottom, and then some of our key players here, which we'll get into once we get into the book. And then on the back, we can take a quick look at that as well, which we, of course, have some key players once again making an appearance. All new, all different, and all bets are off. This is a new X Factor team, the previous X Factor team being the original X-Men characters, kind of functioning as a separate entity from the X-Men. This is the second incarnation of the X Factor team, more modern, taking place in the late 80s into the 90s, so you're going to have a little bit more of that 90s flair on this particular run by Peter David. But we can go ahead and get under the dust jacket and take a look at the board and the dust jacket itself. And here we are under the dust jacket, taking a quick look at the inner flaps like we tend to do. Peter David just has that X Factor, obviously a little bit of a pun on words there. And then on the right side, we do have the creators, Peter David, who is going to be your main writer. And then you do have Dale Keown on art, Jay Lee doing some as well, and then Joe Quesada wrapping up the back half. And then you do have some art by Larry Stroman also. But we can go ahead and spread this book out, take a look at the wraparound cover. And here we are with the wraparound cover. A lot of our key players once again. We have Havoc Guido, Strongman, Multiple Man, Polaris, and Wolfsbane up at the top, kind of on the spine there. Very pungent wraparound cover, a lot of bright colors, a very awesome action sequence taking place. This one is definitely a keeper and a beautiful piece. And here we are with the binding. Not a bad binding at all. It's a little bit of a funky eye, but it is still an eye. I had no issues when reading this. I did recently complete a reread on this omnibus, which is why I'm doing the review, and I had absolutely no issues at all with gutter loss when it came to art, splash pages, speech bubbles being on the gutter curve, or anything along those lines. So, pretty well put together book. Alright, let's get right into the book. So we do have some black end sheets here, nothing too creative, and then we do have Havoc on the title page, X Factor by Peter David, and then we do have some creator credits here. Obviously, this book is called X Factor by Peter David, so he is the writer that is mostly credited throughout this entire book. But you do have some other writers credited, such as Fabian Nicieza, Scott Lobdell, Skip Dietz, Joe Quesada, J.M. DeMatteis, just to name a few. But where you're really going to get some star power is going to be in the pencilers, where you have Larry Stroman, to Dale Keown, to Joe Quesada, to Jay Lee, to name a few there. So a lot of star power when it comes to the pencilers. You are going to have primarily Larry Stroman and Joe Quesada through a large portion of this run. And then after that, you get the table of contents. Obviously, one would expect this collects a lot of X Factor, which it does. And then you come to the first issue collected in this omnibus, which is X Factor 70. This is a issue that really catches you up to speed before jumping into the brunt of the actual run itself. Because like I previously mentioned, the original X Factor team was actually made up of the original X-Men team. Cyclops, Jean Grey, Angel, Iceman, Beast. So that was your primary X Factor team before Peter David really started getting onto this title. And then once he landed on this title, he really shook things up by creating a roster of his own. But this does kind of catch you up with what's taking place with the X-Men, X Factor, and the members that we are going to kind of get to know throughout this omnibus. And really, a lot of this is just setting in place the characters that this run is primarily going to focus on in X Factor issue 71, which is the all new, all different roster and team that Peter David has put together. And I love this incarnation of the team. These are some of my favorite X-Men characters, my favorite mutant characters. But you do have Havoc, Strongman, or Strong Guy, Polaris, Multiple Man, and Wolfsbane. You really get to know these characters very well. Peter David, while he has a comedic tone with most of his books, I feel like he leans off it a little bit during this particular run. There is still the quips and the funny moments and the irony that Peter David does lean into here and there, but overall, it is a pretty serious book. So the, I guess, setup for the team of X Factor is actually done by the character of, which I can get to for you guys, of Val. Now this character is going to be your mutant liaison, the middleman between mutants and the government, and why she really exists and why she's in a lot of ways a secondary team leader to X Factor, even a little bit over Havoc, is because the X Factor team during this particular era and this run is a government sanctioned team. It is a government organized mutant superhero crime fighting team. And it is very interesting, especially during this era, because you had obviously X-Men, which were a little bit more of your superhero types, and then you had X Factor, which was your more government sanctioned and government controlled mutant team, and then you eventually do have X Force, that is a little bit more of a vigilante anti-hero group that really gets their hands a little bit dirty when it comes to mutant affairs and fighting against the bad guys and what you'd kind of expect in a comic book. But really, the best aspect of this book is that they are a government sanctioned team. Because of that, they really get involved in some pretty interesting and thought-provoking situations that really have a lot of commentary on society as a whole, and also the government as a whole, and really their function and where things can kind of go awry when you do have a superpower that is in control of multiple people and sometimes even multiple superpowered people. And that is really delved into actually in these Incredible Hulk and X Factor issues that we're about to take a look at now, which is the storyline War and Pieces. It's a 3-part storyline that is a crossover with Peter David's Incredible Hulk and Peter David's X Factor, and really it dives deep into kind of dictators and kind of the international affairs of the world and the positives and negatives that a superpowered mutant team can kind of have on that. And it's delved into pretty deep, especially with Hulk, who in a lot of ways is kind of an extremist in some ways, but also the moral compass. He is the character that is seeing the bad and wants to stop the bad, where X Factors has their hands a little bit more tied when it comes to what they can or cannot do. So, very good story. Definitely one you want to read into a little bit while actually reading the story itself. The story before is also pretty interesting. Dives deep into Multiple Man and his dupes and kind of how they work and what it means when a dupe dies and Multiple Man, Jamie Madrox, lives on. Is it still a life dying, or is it not? Very interesting dialogue, thought-provoking stuff again. So Peter David really kind of hit it a home run as soon as he jumped on this particular title, and it's very interesting. I definitely enjoyed Peter David kind of diving deeper into the highbrow side of his storytelling. But that is not without the drama and the comedic elements that Peter David likes to dive into also. You do have a little bit of a love triangle between Polaris and Havoc and Wolfsbane, which is not as cut and paste, or cut and dry rather, as you would kind of expect it. It does get delved into in the later half of this run, or the latter half, not exactly the tail end, but still in the later part of the omnibus, which I think took a little long to get to, but still I was happy Peter David did touch on it, even though he does kind of touch on it throughout the entire run. You just don't know yet, which this is kind of paying homage to. But Polaris is a great character, to say the least. How she is illustrated is even more great, in my opinion. Very incredible artwork in here, and the standout characters for me personally are Havoc and Guido, Strong Guy, just because they are, I don't know, you got Havoc, who's a little bit more of a Boy Scout, which is maybe pretty crazy to say just because he is Cyclops' brother. He is Alexander Summers, the brother of Scott Summers, but he is a real Boy Scout, and he really wants to complete his missions. And then you have Guido, who's kind of on the opposite side of the spectrum, or Strong Guy. Most people in this book think that name's stupid, so that's why I keep calling him Guido. But yeah, they are kind of different, or on the opposite side of the spectrums, and therefore balance each other out. They have a lot of good back and forth and banter throughout this entire book. But this is the one issue I kind of had, which is the inclusion of the Executioner song issues that took place in only X Factor. While I am a completionist and I want all of the issues of X Factor, and you do have some incredible art by Jay Lee in here, it honestly, if you've never read Executioner song, I could see people being very, very lost to what is happening and why they're on planet Earth 1 second and then suddenly they're on the moon, and then, so I do like that it was included, but I can see people getting very confused with it. Here's a incredible image of my boy Cyclops, who is my favorite X-Men, despite people hating him as a character. But you do have the Executioner song, at least the X Factor issues. And then we have my favorite issue of this entire omnibus, but also one of my favorite issues ever, which is X Factor 87, which is a psychological analysis on the X Factor's team. Really breaks them down, gives a lot of meaning to what they say and what they do throughout the run. So definitely do yourself a favor and read that. And then we do have some kind of random issues that are included. Some drama between Quicksilver and his wife at the time, Crystal, the Inhuman. And then we do have a kind of a pretty social political story when it comes to Genosha and mutant kind and the enslavement, borderline enslavement, and prejudice against mutants when it comes to Genosha and the magistrates and everything along those lines, which there's a lot of history that does enrich stories like that more than just the issues that are included in here. But once you get to the later half, you then get the Fatal Attractions issue here, which Fatal Attractions is one of my favorite X-Men events, so it kind of sucked not to have the entire event here again and just the XFactor issues, but it is what it is. And then we do have a bonus story section, which is kind of the rest of the omnibus here, not including the extras in the back, and this is all kind of guest writer stuff that Peter David did on X-Men titles. So really some overall good stuff throughout this entire omnibus. The later half is just for entertainment purposes. It doesn't really add anything to the X-Factor run, but it does definitely entertain if you are the X-Men or X-Factor, X-Force reader. So and then we do have obviously the extras, which you have the sketches, some very interesting covers here, which I may have spent a lot of time staring at. And then we do have the Marvel Masterpiece cards, me having a decent amount of these, especially these top three. Very nostalgic to look at. But that does wrap up the omnibus itself. I don't want to go too into details or too into detail with the extras, but we can head back to the table. And welcome back, nerds and nerdettes. So like I touched on during the overhead shots, this is the second iteration of the X-Factor team. The original X-Factor team being that of the original X-Men members, from Cyclops to Jean Grey to Beast, Angel, and Iceman. But when Peter David got onto the title, he created a all-new, all-different X-Factor team with characters that we've met throughout the X-Men history, or the X titles history, I guess, technically, because one of these characters appeared in New Mutants first, but still, you are going to know these characters if you are a huge X-Men fan up to this point, if you haven't read this, I guess, which, if you are a huge X-Men fan, you probably have. But I have always been a massive X-Factor fan. That's always been my favorite X book, whether it came to X-Men, New Mutants, X-Force. X-Factor was always my favorite book, and that's mainly because of Havoc. Havoc being one of my three favorite mutants in the X-Men and mutant world, and he really gets a lot of focus in this entire book, being the team's leader. You have a lot of focus really on all of the members as a whole, but I would probably say Havoc does get put in the most situations where you really get to dive deep into his character and what makes him such an incredible character, in my opinion. And it really does dive into his sense of duty and his integrity as a leader of a team, but also a mutant that now has government connections. Because where this X Factor is very different is it is a government organized and government sanctioned mutant team, unlike that of X Force or even the X-Men. This is a quite literally government body that is just full of mutants. You do have a mutant and government liaison of which is the character of Val. She's a very interesting and very government-like character, and you really become familiar with her, but untrusting at times also, and I think that is done very well. I think Peter David really dives into that. One of the issues that I do want to touch on is X Factor issue 78, which is a deep dive psychologically into each of the members of X Factor and really their origin and what makes them them and what makes them such a valuable asset to the team in a lot of ways also. And that is probably one of my favorite issues that I've ever read in my entire career of reading comic books, because it really, really fleshes out those characters so beautifully. So I am very impressed with Peter David's writing capability when it comes to definitely that specific issue, but this entire run is pretty well written in my honest opinion. You do have a lot of very interesting and thought-provoking storylines, but you are also going to have the X Factor issues that took place during Executioner Song, as well as Fatal Attractions. That is the one shortcoming for this particular omnibus. I wish the entire events were just collected or these issues were just skipped over, and that's mainly because I can imagine a new reader that hasn't read those X-Men events or X-Men crossover events, however you want to coin that term, um, and could really be lost, especially during Executioner Song, where the setting and where the characters are changes pretty drastically, and it could definitely feel like it came out of left field if you don't exactly know what's taking place and what took place. So that is the one shortcoming as far as the writing and kind of the mapping of this particular omnibus. But I get you can't collect everything, and those are X Factor issues, and the completionist in me wants them, but I can see it being very confusing. But the art throughout here is also incredible. One creator specifically that I feel like really captured the art and the paneling and the embodiment of these characters is Joe Quesada. Once he jumps on the book, I feel like the art in it improves drastically, but in the best way possible for the X Factor title. And I know that's a little hard to understand, I guess, but the tone of X Factor is very comedic at times, but also very dark. And I feel like Joe Quesada really emphasizes the silliness of a lot of the way these characters look, from Wolfsbane, who is literally a woman slash dog hybrid, and then Strong Guy, who's this huge muscle bound balloon man, and he really kind of plays into those during his illustrations and his paneling. So I think Joe Quesada definitely is the best artist during this particular time throughout this particular omnibus, and he does jump on the run with Peter David. But overall, such a great read. All of these characters, from Guido, Strong Guy, to Jamie, Multiple Man, Alex Summers, Havoc, Polaris, Wolfsbane, Val, all of these characters are so great. And Strong Guy and Havoc specifically are two of my favorite X-Men characters ever. Also, for my Quicksilver fans, he's a member of the team as well, so you have him having a lot of focus also, especially when it comes to his personalities and kind of his very interesting past when it comes to him being a villain and then not a villain and then a hero and then an Avenger and then X-Men. So they do dive into that also, and I very much enjoyed my reading experience. I think it's a very interesting and quirky team, and instead of trying to make something serious that doesn't feel it, they really just lean into it, and I love that. I love that they didn't shy away. There's comedy, but there's a lot of dark elements in this particular omnibus, and I loved that. So for the rating that I am going to give this particular omnibus, it is going to be a 8 out of 10. I think it is such a great title. I've always loved X Factor, like I said, and honestly, Volume 2, the contents that's collected in that gets astronomically better. So I'm very excited to continue my rereading on this particular title, and of course, share my thoughts with you all, but you all do the same in the comments down below. And that does wrap up my review. Thank you so much for watching. I loved shooting this video for you guys because I am a huge X Factor fan. Even though I'm not a huge X-Men fan, I've always been a huge fan of X Factor, the title, and specifically the characters that make an appearance in this omnibus. All of those characters are some of my favorite mutant characters in the Marvel Universe, so I loved going over this with you all. But if you could, leave your comments down below. Let me know what you think of the X Factor team. What run is your favorite run on X Factor? If you enjoyed Peter David's run or Peter David's omnibuses in general, I would love to hear from you all and hear what you all think of this particular title and omnibus. But other than that, if you are not a part of the Illuminati, join the community and hit that subscribe button. It is growing. It is awesome. I love seeing each and every one of you all commenting and talking to one another, talking to me. I love to hear from all of you. Also, if you could do me a favor and hit that thumbs up icon, it really means a lot. And if you did enjoy today's video, hit that bell icon. That way you can get notified anytime content is uploaded. But once again, thank you for watching, and of course, stay nerdy.